When the Fed printed a bunch of money during COVID and gave it to like BlackRock to manage, like, was that incompetence? Especially when BlackRock like wrote a plan at the end of 2019 of the monetary policy that the Fed followed exactly when COVID happened, about what the Fed would need to do during a unforeseen crisis. I mean, it's just like, was that incompetence or is that corruption? You know? And so, I mean, a lot of times they'd try and absolve themselves of like, when they sort of get caught or start to get caught for something corrupt, they'll be like, oh, don't look any further. We're just really stupid. If you consider just like the massive amount of wealth transfer that's happened in the past 20 years to like the people at the very top, obviously, well, I think it's obvious, but I mean, that can't all have been because of incompetence.
Whitney Webb raises questions about the Federal Reserve's decision during the COVID-19 pandemic to print a significant amount of money and entrust its management to firms like BlackRock. She points out that BlackRock had, interestingly, drafted a monetary policy plan at the end of 2019 that closely resembled the actions taken by the Fed when the pandemic struck, aimed at addressing an unforeseen crisis. Webb is intrigued by the alignment between BlackRock's pre-pandemic plan and the Fed's actual response, leading her to ponder whether this sequence of events indicates incompetence on the part of the Fed or suggests a deeper layer of corruption. Webb speculates on the motivations behind such decisions, especially considering the massive wealth transfer to the very top echelons of society over the past 2 decades. She questions the official narratives that sometimes emerge to justify or explain away these decisions, suggesting that claims of incompetence may be used as a cover for actions that could be perceived as corrupt. Through her exploration, Webb encourages a critical examination of monetary policy decisions and their implications for wealth distribution, prompting readers to consider the intricate relationship between government actions, financial institutions, and economic outcomes.
It's come from the government, but it's not, a lot of government policy, whether it's about this or something else, doesn't come organically from the government. It comes from think tanks. It comes from, groups like that, or even the WEF, the World Economic Forum, that are then given to politicians, and politicians legislate and enact it, and then the state enforces it. But it's not necessarily the ideas of the legislature and the state itself, these policies. And more often than not, these think tanks are funded by corporations and billionaires and all of these guys. And they also own the politicians. So it's really them creating the policy. And they use the state as an enforcer to force it on the public, right? So that's, I guess, the global public-private partnership is what my colleague Ian Davis calls they, right? And I think it's pretty fair. He puts the BIS at the top, by the way, of the pyramid. This policy, one of the earliest iterations of it, at least in the United States, was during the Obama administration. They called it a driver's license for the internet. The idea of, in order to access the internet, when you set up, internet connection at your house, the internet service provider links all of your internet traffic to your ID. And in doing so, the government and the signals intelligence arm or intelligence agency of the government then has access to not just everything you're posting and writing online, but also everything you read and consume online.
And everything you buy.
And everything you buy. Totally. I mean, this whole push is completely related to ending financial anonymity and financial privacy as well. It's a completely interrelated thing. And I've done pretty extensive deep dives on this going back to probably like 2021. Because it's very tied up with how they're likely to force this regulated internet on the populace. Because they're not just going to be like, let's do this now. I mean, people aren't going to go along with it. So they need some sort of event that gets people angry and afraid and panicking in order to stick it through. So basically, this is going to be folded into, I guess, what I would call a Cyber Patriot Act. The Patriot Act being the legislation pushed through in the U.S. after September 11th, 2001. Right. A lot of which wasn't necessarily related to anything to do with 9/11, but was a huge power grab by the state taking advantage opportunistically of the panic after 9/11. So they need some sort of event like that to ram all this stuff through. But the plans have been on the books for a very long time, and it's not just the US, it's really everywhere. I mean, I think in the UK, you have something called like the online safety bill. They have all these different excuses. Exactly. A lot of it, like the online safety bill, they'll say, oh, it's about protecting children. But really, it's about ending encryption, which law enforcement in the UK and the US have been trying to do so hard for years and years and years. I mean, Bill Barr, who is Attorney General under...
Whitney Webb discusses the influence of external entities like think tanks and organizations such as the World Economic Forum, WEF, on government policy. She suggests that many policies enacted by governments do not originate organically within these institutions, but are instead proposed by these external groups. These groups, often funded by corporations and billionaires, effectively shape legislation through their influence over politicians. This process, as described by Webb's colleague Ian Davis, is referred to as a global public-private partnership, with the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, placed at the top of this hierarchical structure. Webb then delves into specific examples of how such influence can impact personal privacy and internet freedom. She references an initiative from the Obama administration termed a driver's license for the internet, which aimed to link internet usage to individual identities, thus granting the government and its intelligence agencies access to extensive personal data. This concept extends beyond just surveillance, touching on financial privacy and the push towards a regulated internet. The strategy to implement such sweeping changes, according to Webb, relies on leveraging public fear and anger following significant events, drawing a parallel to the Patriot Act enacted after the September 11 attacks. This approach, which Webb likens to a cyber Patriot Act, could potentially strip away layers of privacy under the guise of national security or public safety, with real motivations possibly including control over encryption and internet freedoms. Webb also points out similar trends in the UK, such as the Online Safety Bill, which ostensibly aims to protect children but could also be used to undermine encryption and expand surveillance. She highlights the close relationship between the US and UK, especially in terms of national security and intelligence, sharing through the Five Eyes Alliance, underscoring the global nature of these privacy and policy concerns.
But the US government, I mean, US is an empire. They want to be able to go to any country and say, you can't do that. We're actually in charge. You know what I mean? So Binance not being under their thumb and being active in all these other countries, allowing people in Iran to use their services, for example. I mean, that was a big sticking point for them. It wasn't like criminals, terrorists in Iran. It was just like people in Iran. They're subject to US sanctions. You're not complying with US sanctions. And so we're going to charge you $1 billion and take out your chief executive and put our people in charge. You know, this is the mafia, guys. I wrote a 1,000-page book about how the government is in the US is organized crime, specifically the Department of Justice. And that's what they're doing. And keep in mind, too, the DOJ has an insane amount of Bitcoin it holds, and they want more. Well, you know, I definitely think Bitcoin has the potential to be a tool for financial freedom, but I think there's major efforts well underway to co-opt that to serve the same agenda, right? And so I think people in the Bitcoin space that want it to be a tool for financial freedom need to get wise to those efforts to co-opt and resist, because it's either a tool of financial freedom or it's not. You know what I mean? And so if you cede enough territory and let them like completely dollarize Bitcoin and turn it into like a tool of US empire to keep the dollar afloat and like, you know, keep dollar hegemony going forever and ever and ever, and, you know, are saying it's a flaw in Bitcoin that you like can't put dollars easily on Bitcoin and all of this. I mean, no, I mean, the whole point supposedly, right, of creating Bitcoin was to give Wall Street banks the middle finger and create something that had immutable sound monetary policy, correct? So if you allow them to co-opt it so it's not those things anymore, what are you left with?
The same old world.
Is it a tool of financial freedom, or is it just, has the promise of Bitcoin been hollowed out and replaced with Wall Street garbage?
Is that what you think the issue there, like ETFs? Are you alluding to the ETFs?
There's all sorts of things that are happening in Bitcoin right now that could be under that umbrella. But when you start to have people like BlackRock being like, you know what, we actually like Bitcoin now, that's a sign to pay attention. So I think people need to, in the Bitcoin space, need to be very aware that there is a fight being had right now about the future of Bitcoin. And you have to decide which side you're on. Are you going to fight for Bitcoin to be a tool of financial freedom, or are you going to allow it to be co-opted by the powers that be that it was supposedly designed to resist them and, be something they can't control? Are you going to give them control of it? I mean, the answer should be no to any Bitcoiner worth respecting, in my opinion.
Whitney Webb shares her perspective on how the U.S. government, which she views as seeking to maintain its global influence, has approached entities like Binance that operate outside its control. She suggests that the U.S. uses its power to enforce its sanctions globally, penalizing companies like Binance for providing services in countries like Iran, which are subject to U.S. sanctions. Webb likens these actions to those of a mafia, asserting that the U.S. government, particularly the Department of Justice, operates in a manner similar to organized crime, especially in its pursuit of accumulating Bitcoin. Webb sees Bitcoin as a potential instrument for financial freedom, but warns that there are significant efforts to co-opt it to serve the interests of those in power. She argues that the Bitcoin community must remain vigilant against attempts to subvert the cryptocurrency's foundational principles. Webb highlights the danger of allowing Bitcoin to be dollarized or turned into a tool that supports U.S. financial dominance and the perpetuation of the dollar's hegemony. She stresses that Bitcoin was originally created as an alternative to traditional financial systems and to challenge the control of Wall Street banks. If Bitcoin is co-opted to serve the same systems it was designed to oppose, Webb questions what value it retains as a tool for financial freedom. She points out that when major financial institutions like BlackRock start showing interest in Bitcoin, it should serve as a cautionary signal. Webb concludes by urging the Bitcoin community to actively decide the future of the cryptocurrency, whether to preserve its purpose as a means of financial freedom or to allow it to be co-opted by existing financial powers. She emphasizes the importance of resisting efforts to bring Bitcoin under the control of those it was meant to challenge, advocating for the community to uphold the principles of autonomy and resistance that define Bitcoin's value.